Before we begin, I would like to make some stuffs clear. First disclaimer, there will be a lot of personal opinion in this video. If you cannot handle opinions that do not align with your view, or if you just want to hear the zoology insights, I suggest only watching the creature section of this video. You can check out the timestamps in the description. Second disclaimer, this video is not a season recap or something like that. In fact, I will avoid spoilers as much as I can, because I want you to watch it or read it yourself. That being said, third disclaimer, there will be spoilers on the creatures that will appear. Most of them don't really matter because it won't spoil the overall story. But there is one creature that I would say a major spoiler and the turning point for anime season 1. Before I talk about that, I will give you a warning so you can skip that part if you want to. So no worries. Alright, now that I have made that clear, you can decide on how and if you want to watch this video. Dungeon Meshi. Dungeon Meshi. It's been over a month since the anime finished airing its first season, so I think this is a good time for me to talk about it. The story takes place in a fantasy world with a lot of dungeon exploration. But the somewhat niche part of the series is food. Yes, they cook the monster they defeat, which is why the title is Dungeon Meshi. Meshi literally means meal. The title literally means dungeon meal. As simple as that. But the series itself is actually not as simple as it sounds. I first heard about Dungeon Meshi back in mid-2018, I think around July or even August. My friend recommended me. She said I will like this series. So I googled the title, read the synopsis, and checked the genre tags, and I was confused. You see, my usual kind of media are psychological and mystery, or both. It's not that I don't like fantasy. I mean, I really like some fantasy series, but those are also psychological genre with darker tones. And it's not like I couldn't take cooking series seriously. I enjoy Yakita de Japan and Shokugeki no Soma. What's weird to me is the fact that that friend said I will like the series, because whenever she said something like that, it's usually something that will hook me on. And again, that's usually psychological and or mystery series. So I tried reading one chapter, and to be honest, I'm even more confused. It feels pretty comedic, which is usually the opposite of my preferred media. You see, if you only watch the anime, I should tell you, Laios, which is the main character, looks really stern and serious in chapter 1 of the manga. It's like the typical serious knight leader of fantasy genre, but he said things that feels very comedic. It feels like something that should not came out of that kind of character. That being said, this exact kind of character trope is very common in comedy series, which amplifies my feeling of looking at the series as a comedy. That's why I'm confused. Why would my friend think I will like a comedy series? Because I'm the type that will hear a joke and reacts like this, aka, quite literally, no reaction, not even a change of expression. I continued reading to chapter 2, and my impression is basically the same. At around that time, Monster Hunter World PC was released. I basically spent my entire free time playing it, and to put it simply, I forgot about the existence of Dungeon Meshi. That is until last year, I think around October or November 2023, when I saw the trailer of the anime, and I was like, wait a second, isn't this the series that my friend recommended years ago? And I asked my friend about it, and yes it is. So I asked my friend one more time, are you completely sure that I will like this series? And she simply said, yes, that's it, without any explanation. Oh, and she told me the manga had just finished, totaling to 97 chapters. And I was like, alright, I'll just wait for the anime to air and we'll see. Fast forward several months, the anime aired and I checked it out. When I watched episode 1, my impression is the same as when I read it years ago. In fact, it feels, I don't know, even weirder. Maybe because now there are a lot more frames and music, so the comedic feeling was amplified and it lasted longer. So, to put it simply, it didn't look like something that I would like, just not my cup of tea, you know? It's not that it's bad or anything like that. But, because my friend was so sure that I will like it, I decided to continue watching it. The next week, episode 2, still the same impression. But then, episode 3, oh boy, I was blown away. I was like, now I get it why she thought I would like this series. And, to put it simply, I cannot wait to see what's gonna happen next episode. So, to put in some context, the series follows a format that I usually call Monster of the Week formula. It's a common format in tokusatsu. The series is delivered mostly with new monsters as the focus each week or two, but still has an overarching story, and each week slowly leads to that. It's also commonly used in many Western media, for example, Supernatural, quite literally the same formula. Hannibal and Sherlock, with new case each week. House MD with new patient each week, etc. For Dungeon Meshi, it's obviously monster and dish. Anyway, after watching episode 3, I just straight up read the manga, restarting from chapter 1 up to the last chapter. I believe I finished it in 2 or 3 days. That's how hooked I am to this series. By the way, even after I finished the manga, I still watch the anime every single week. In fact, I have a strong reason for that. I want to see more detail on the monsters, their anatomy, how they move, stuff like that. First thing that I noticed was the openings tease some important stuff. Stuff that will appear later in the series, like way later. So it's kinda funny. It is definitely a major spoiler, but it's shown without context, so those that started with the anime won't notice at all. Second thing that I noticed, the anime doesn't show the dish's ingredients and nutrition value. Well, of course, it's not important to the story. It's one of the fun tidbits for me. Because, at every chapter, I would stare at the nutrition value and think what ingredients provide specific nutrients. Why is the protein so high? Why is the iron so high? And stuff like that. So, the anime faithfully adapts the manga, like very faithfully. Still, there are stuffs that you cannot get in the anime. For example, in each volume of the manga, you will get extra pages called miscellaneous monster tales. These are tidbits about the creatures. Because it's an extra, it's not adapted into the anime. Well, except the tidbits about the living armor holding hands. That's not in the manga chapter, it's actually in the extra. I think that's about it. If you are curious about these extra stuffs on the monster, consider checking out the manga volume. Also, there are some skipped dialogues in the anime, which are not important to the story, but it can be nice to know. For example, when I was drafting for this video, I list all the specific information on the creatures that I remember. Then I skimmed the anime episode to make sure I did not misremember, and I stumbled upon some problems while doing this. I'll give you one example. In my draft, I wrote Basilisk lay egg every 3 days. That's what I remember. Then I checked the anime episode, and I didn't find anything about that. So I thought, probably in miscellaneous monster tales of the manga. Then I checked that out. Nothing. My last possible source, the Adventurer's Bible. Still nothing. And I was so confused. Did my brain just made that up or what? Because I'm pretty sure I've read that somewhere. Then I checked the manga chapter, and yes, there it is. But it's not in the anime. So that's what I meant. There are some minor dialogues that is not adapted, which most likely won't even matter to most people, but it matters to me. So if you really like the series and you have a lot of time, you can consider reading the manga and watching the anime for the full experience. I'm not sure where to put this in the video, so I'm just gonna put it here. I did mention the Adventurer's Bible in this section anyway, so if you really like Dungeon Meshi and want to know more about the world, you can consider getting the Adventurer's Bible. It was released at around volume 10 of the manga, I think, so there will be spoilers in that though. After the manga ended, the author made an updated version of this, but for now it's still JP only, I believe, so perhaps you can wait for that instead. So, how do I feel about this series overall? I thought about this for a moment, and I came up with a simple and kinda fitting answer. This series feels like a full course meal. The first half feels like the appetizer. By the way, that's the entire season 1 of the anime. If you watch that and you already felt the writing is really good, then be prepared for season 2. Because that is the main course. Right after where season 1 ended, there will be a lot of revelation and serious stuff going on and on, almost non-stop. Then, the last volume, which is around 6 or 7 chapters, is a nice dessert to clean your palate. But not just that, every dish has a complex flavor. For each bite you take, if you focus on it, you'll notice more and more flavor. For each dish you eat, you'll notice different dishes have different major flavor that the chef wanted you to taste. For example, some chapters are very comedic, especially the early ones. The Shapeshifter chapter straight up feels like a well-written mystery manga. In my opinion, a good mystery media is the one that provides you with enough clues so that you can think along and figure out the answer yourself. That is, if you pay attention to detail. You can formulate your own thought and see if you are correct at the end when all is revealed. And that's how it is in the Shapeshifter chapter. I can figure out the fake Chilchak and Senshi just by paying attention to detail, because the author put subtle hints here and there, and I'm rewarded for thinking along. As a mystery genre enjoyer, I'm delighted. And then, some of the chapters felt like psychological manga. I won't tell which one and what happened because those chapters are major spoilers to the overarching story, but those who already watched the anime, and even more, who already finished the manga, will most likely know what I meant. The fact that many flavors can be mixed into the series yet still feel very balanced makes me appreciate the author a lot. But what hooked me into the series is actually not that. It's the creatures. So, if you haven't noticed, let me make it obvious. I'm a zoologist. Like, actually, not just a self-proclaimed title. So of course I'm interested in the creature. Designing creatures for a story is not that hard. I mean, you can do whatever you want, and then just say all of this just works. Because, it's your own story, your own universe, so technically whatever you say works will works. A lot of popular media's creatures are like that, which I think is completely fine. What amazed me with Dungeon Meshi is how natural everything feels. And the thing is, you can definitely design a creature that feels natural if you know some biology. Or, you can just look up some cool animal facts and work around that. The thing is, the authors stick to the usual fantasy stuff. Creatures that were already popular, like living armor, mimic, harpy, merman, stuffs like that. Yet she managed to make those creatures natural. That's what amazed me. Not only that, she emphasizes a lot on the ecology. The not so subtle message of the series is about ecosystem balance, how we need to keep it, how important it is. Because, we are part of the ecosystem. Talking about creature design is like looking at the sea. Most people will just look at the surface. As long as it looks blue and clear, it's fine. But those that understand more will dive into the sea and look at what's inside. How deep it is, how about the current, the pollution, what's the seafloor made of, sand quality, dissolved oxygen, dissolved minerals, etc. My point is, it takes some extent of expertise to be able to understand how great something is. Same thing with magic show, singing, cooking, or perhaps everything in this world. Because I'm a zoologist, I could appreciate her work more than most people. It made me wonder, who is this author? What's her background? And stuff like that. The only occasion where I am curious about the author like this is towards Kinoshita Itaru, the author of Dino-san. To give an analogy of how I feel at certain points when reading the manga, it's basically like people tweeting, Miyazaki or Kojima, I kneel, with the absolute cinema meme. I'm gonna be honest with you, I even verbally said Ryokokui, I kneel at some point when I was reading the manga, which is kinda funny when I think about it. Why did I even do that? So, I'm gonna talk about the creatures, starting with the classification. There are non-biological creatures, namely spirits, undead or spirit of the dead in the JP version, and magical creatures. Just to be clear, I'm not gonna talk about these. Now, there are plantae, which are plants, fungi, which are fungi, and then the animals, which are classified into more specific groups. I'm gonna talk about them in order of the pages in the Adventurer's Bible. First, there is Anthozoa. In our world, Anthozoa consists of corals and sea anemones. In Dungeon Meshi, the Anthozoa are basically sea anemones, but not marine creatures. I'll talk about that later. Then there is Mammalia. It's mammal, self-explanatory. Then there is Aphes, which is birds, also self-explanatory. And then there is Aphespoda, which consists of hippogriff and griffin. This is an original group of animal, doesn't exist in our world. So let's analyze this. Avespoda means bird foot, which makes sense. Griffin and hippogriff have bird feet and extra feet. But the correct name, grammatically speaking, would be either Avipoda or Avepoda. The thing is, Avepoda and also Avipoda exist in our real world, which is the old and unused synonym of the Tetanurae clade. Taking that name wouldn't work for griffin and hippogriff because it's too different. That's the extent of my thought, so let's move on. Then, there is Pisces, which is fish. In the Adventurer's Bible, it only consists of the merman, or called fishman in the international release. But there is actually another fish in the series, which is the bladefish. Not sure why it's not listed here. Anyway, next is amphibia. It's amphibian, also self-explanatory. Then there is reptilia, which is reptile, with one representative, sea serpent. Now, the next group would be insecta, but let's just jump into serpentes, so it's easier to talk about. Serpentes in our real world is actually the clade for modern snakes. Some consider this a suborder, some just a clade. In any case, it's the group of modern snakes. Now, if you look at the dungeon Meshi serpentes, it's basilisk and cockatrice. I wondered, did the author intended for them to actually be considered snakes? Or the serpentes is a completely different group from our real-world serpentes? Because in the JP version, it's actually just called serpent, not serpentes. And the kanji is for tail and snake, which is not how the real-world snake group is written. So I guess it's an entirely different group. Next, insecta, which is insect. It consists of treasure bugs and a creature that has not appeared in season 1, but I'm gonna focus on the treasure bug. So, treasure bug is not a species, not even a natural classification. It consists of many arthropods that mimic treasure, including the pearl centipede. Centipede is not an insect, it's a myriapod, specifically class Chilopoda. That's it, let's move on. Next is crustacea, which is, well, crustacean. It consists of mimic and huge scorpion. Again, scorpion is not a crustacea, it's an arachnid. That's all. Alright, the next page consists of slime, cephalopoda, and shellfish. That makes me think slime is supposed to be a mollusk in this world, which is fine. Cephalopoda is self-explanatory. Living armor is a shellfish, but it's not specified with shellfish. In real world, shellfish is not a scientific group, it's an artificial classification. It could be bivalvia, could be polyplacophora, could even be monoplacophora, or it could be an entirely different kind of shellfish that we don't have. Well, to be fair, the living armor don't really have a real-world equivalent, so yeah. Next, there is chimera, which are the chimeras. We do have chimera in real world, but not this kind of chimera. Anyway, the last is dragon. Dragon is somewhat an anything goes group in Dungeon Meshi. I'm not sure what's the diagnostic character of this group, and I don't think it's stated anywhere. So I'm just gonna say it is what it is. In Season 1, there are 2 dragons. If you look at the nightmares, you'll understand why I'm confused about the diagnostic character. In Season 2, we'll get to see more dragons. In fact, you can see it right now in the Season 2 trailer. And that's all. Now I'm gonna talk about the biological creatures one by one. Well, not every single one, I guess. If I didn't mention it, then that means I didn't have any insights. So, I'm gonna start with the fungi first, the walking mushroom. So, I'm not a mycologist, so I don't know much about fungi, but I'm pretty sure a mushroom that can walk does not exist. I know, crazy right? Slime mold's colony can move in a way, but that's not a member of fungi. It's a completely different group of organisms. And then there is changeling, which is, yeah, it just works, I guess. I do like the idea that the changeling works is a spore though. Next, the plants. I'm also not a botanist, so I don't know much about plants. But still, at least I know some. First, man-eating plant. So, carnivorous plants do exist. They don't eat humans, of course. They eat insects. But the same concept. So, in biology, everything has a cost. What I meant by that is, every organismal structure needs maintenance. At the very least, they need energy. They need nutrients, specific material to form and maintain the structures. That's why, if a structure loses their functionality, it will degenerate each generation, become rudimentary, slowly becomes vestigial organs, and sometimes disappear completely. That way, an organism does not need to pay extra cost for something they don't need. Intuitive, right? Now, the same logic goes with developing a structure. If there is no significant benefit, a structure will not develop out of nowhere. I mean, sure, evolution is technically semi-random because of random mutation. But the new structure won't be retained if it results in a disadvantage. So, where am I going with this? Well, look at plants, right? Plants are, on surface level, a passive creature that absorbs nutrient from the ground and make their own food with light energy. In scientific term, photolithoautotrophs. The question is, why would such organism evolve into something that eats other creature? You will understand if you look at where these carnivorous plants naturally grow. Let me just give you the answer. Most of them grow in habitats with low soil nitrogen and phosphorus, but a lot of water and lights. What that means is, nitrogen and phosphorus are scarce, but the rest are abundant, which is why they need to evolve some way to get these scarce nutrients. Soil is a no-no, and they cannot move. But maybe if the nutrients somehow move towards them, wouldn't that be amazing? And yes, that nutrients are insects. So they evolve into carnivorous plant because they'll be disadvantaged otherwise. Now, let's get back to the dungeon Meshi. Why would a carnivorous plant exist? The habitat looks fine. There are tons of animals that will defecate, and those are nice source of nitrogen and phosphorus for the soil. In this case, I think it's the opposite. Not because they'll be disadvantaged, but they did because they can afford to. With how much potential prey that enters the dungeon, maybe it's more beneficial for them to become man-eaters. When you think about it, there are tons of creatures inside the dungeons that seems very human-centric. I'll talk about it later when it come up. Oh, and before I forget, let me just say, I don't think any plants can attack prey deliberately. Real-life carnivorous plants activate their traps reactively. It's not like they voluntarily snap at prey or something like that. Next, mandrakes. Mandrake's myth is based on the real-life mandrake, the genus Mandragora. They have large taproot which might or might not resemble human. It's just a case of pareidolia really. Of course they don't scream if you uproot it. But some plants do make sounds by the way. It's nothing major, just like popping sounds and stuff like that. Most aren't even noticeable, but yeah. Now, dryads. Out of all the creatures in Dungeon Meshi, I think dryads confuse me the most. Why would dryads mimic humans? They don't eat humans, they don't need humans to pollinate, they are so protective of their place that they attack anyone that come close. So, why would they mimic human? Why produce scent that attracts human? That's very counterintuitive. Anyway, last of the plants, barometes. Now, this one is the opposite. The fruit resembles sheep, so predators eat it and disperse the seed. Simple, effective, and rational. By the way, barometes is also based on a real plant. It's called Cibotium barometes. The root of these plants looks like a golden, hairy thing, which doesn't really resemble a sheep if you ask me, but yeah, that's the source of the barometes myth. Alright, now we can enter my field, animals. I'm gonna talk about them in the order of appearance. Well, technically the red dragon is the first one to appear, but I'll save that for later since it has its own chapter. So first, huge scorpion. They strike with their pincer first, and then they sting. This is in a sense correct. As I've said before, all biological structures have a cost, and so does venom. They need time and material to create more venom, so they wouldn't just waste their venom willy-nilly. If they can kill things without using their venom, they will, which is why the first weapon will be their pincer. But they will not use their pincer if there is nothing to pinch. For example, If you put a scorpion on your body, it's too big to pinch, so they will not use their pincer, they will just straight up sting you. Among the real world scorpions, those with slender pincers use their stinger more. Meanwhile, those with bigger pincer just brute force their way with their pincer. That being said, some species will always do both and sting you over and over again. So yeah, the huge scorpion in Dungeon Meshi tend to use their pincer because they are big, so it's intuitive. Next, slime. When I first look at this slime, I focus on the brain. Is that an actual brain or just ganglion? If it's brain, then that is very expensive. If it's some kind of cerebral ganglion, then it makes more sense to me. But still, my thought was, why would a slime need any kind of brain? Usually slime is a very simple organism, so it'll be more cost efficient if they just have neural nets like Nidarian. You see, terrestrial animals need brains or at least cerebral ganglion because they need to traverse many obstacles. Because most of the time, the terrain is not a flat surface. Meanwhile, marine drifters can just follow the current without thinking about obstacles most of the time, which is why they don't need brain. The thing is, slime can just conform to the terrain anyway, because their body is liquidy, so surely they don't need to think about obstacles. And then comes the next information. Slime approach potential prey by detecting their exhalation. So, this is actually the case in many real-world animals. For example, parasitic nematodes detect CO2 exhaled by animals to search for hosts. Female mosquitoes detect CO2 exhaled by animals to locate them and suck their blood. Other blood-sucking insects too. So, what about it? Think of it like this. You cannot guarantee that concentrated CO2 is produced by animal exhalation. What if it's not? And too much CO2 is bad for most animals. So, imagine you have a body that is attracted to concentrated CO2 and automatically approach it. In some cases, that concentrated CO2 might be too much, and you might stumble into some place with a CO2 leak or something. Then, you died. That's why you need a brain. You need it to override the automatic response from your nerve. You need to process the information and think to some extent whether you're gonna give a positive reaction or not. In this case, whether you're gonna approach the CO2 source or not. The thought process doesn't need to be complicated. For example, you could just think whether the concentration is too high or not. If yes, then don't approach it. If no, then go ahead. I think that extent of brain usage sounds appropriate for Dungeon Meshi slime. That being said, these organs are visible in the diagram, right? But where are they in the real creature? Are they also liquidy or what? Anyway, most of the slimes in Dungeon Meshi world actually don't target humans at all. Instead, they are endoparasites of aquatic creatures. That sounds a lot more fitting than being a free-living animal for the slimes. Next, Basilisk. I have several things to talk about here. First, they have venomous spurs. Venomous spurs do exist in real world, specifically in platypus. Next, the egg. This is the typical snake egg, which led me to another thought. I'm gonna save that thought for the last. Next, they say they lay egg every 2 to 3 days like a chicken. The thing is, wild chickens, or technically called the jungle fowls, actually don't lay egg frequently. They are very seasonal, usually laying a clutch of several eggs every breeding season. The layer chickens lay egg frequently because we selectively breed them to do so. The fact that basilisk lay egg every 2 to 3 days also led me to the thought that I'll save for the last. Before that, I'm gonna talk about this remark. Laios said, when it's cut in half, the snake lives longer. So some think the main head is the snake. At first, my thought process is like this. The chicken just died while the snake continues living. If that's true, that must mean the chicken is lacking some sort of important organ, so it cannot live without the snake part. I look at this diagram and thought, it looks like the chicken have even more complete organs than the snake part. So I thought the chicken does not have a brain. But it is confirmed in some chapters that they do have a brain in each head, so that's not it. I reread the sentence and thought, maybe I misunderstood this. Maybe the snake does not continue living, but simply lasted longer. Because, Even if it's only 10 seconds longer, that is technically still lived longer. But still, why? There is no further topic on this, so I just think of it with real world knowledge, which definitely didn't need to happen, but I did it anyway. First, I thought of a real world example of similar things. The fact that cockroach can live without its head. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know, the cockroach did not continue living like usual. The body retains its function, but it basically doesn't do anything, because the brain is in the head after all. They have ganglia in the body to maintain necessary function. They have open circulatory system, and they will quickly form clots so they won't bleed out, which is why the body will live. Still, it won't last forever because they do not receive food. The head is gone, and they need the head to eat. Eventually, they will die because they will run out of energy and nutrient. So, how is this information relevant in the case of the basilisk? I have two trains of thought. First is about the blood. Birds tend to have higher blood pressure because they need to pump more oxygen, especially for their wings. So, my thought is, probably the chicken part bleed out faster than the snake, so it died faster. The second is about the metabolism. Snakes have slow metabolism and they are poikilothermic, so they don't deplete energy that fast. That's why the chicken part died first, because they ran out of energy earlier. Well, both of these thoughts assume the two parts somehow still kept their respective traits. This assumption came up because their anatomy looks like two different animals stitched together, so maybe their physiology is also like that, you know? Still, there is no confirmation, so take it with a grain of salt. Alright, so, the last thought about the basilisk is, how and why do they exist anyway? The author seems to be hinting they are a snake. I mean, they are known as the Serpent King, and I don't think it's rational for a chicken to not only evolve snake tail, but also change their egg into a membranous egg of a snake. That goes against the principle of parsimony. So, I assume it is indeed a snake evolving a whole chicken body. But still, why would a snake develop a whole chicken body as its rear? In real world, we do have animals that evolve structures that resemble other creatures. For example, Pseudocerastes urarachnoides. Their tail looks like a spider, or at least some kind of arthropod, but it's not an actual sentient arthropod with a whole set of organs. They use this tail to lure birds. In the case of basilisk, I don't think chicken or snake tail is an effective bait. What would you even lure with that? Humans maybe? Or other predators? I decided to stop that train of thought and thought of several other possible answers. The first is to incubate eggs. Some snakes do incubate their eggs, but because they are not endothermic, they need to bask under the sun, return to their egg to incubate until the heat dissipates, then return back to gain heat, then return back to the egg, and so on. They might evolve chicken body to simplify this incubation, because chicken is endothermic. Or, even simpler answer, it's because chicken is endothermic, so basilisk can be more active as an individual. The thing is, with how complete their respective organs are, it feels like they are two creatures combined. So maybe they are created by combining a snake and a domestic chicken. That explains the frequency of egg laying. But my thoughts don't really matter anyway, because the origin of basilisk was revealed in chapter 68. When I read that chapter, I was like, oh, well, okay then. Yeah, time to move on. Big bet. So, the Adventurer Bible stated that big bats pick up prey, drop them off to kill them, then suck their blood. In real worlds, most bat catches flying prey. Some do swoop prey on the ground. Some species even target frogs and lizards. But those did not catch their prey with their foot. They swoop down and bite their prey, then fly away carrying the prey with their mouth. There are some specialized fishing bats that catches aquatic prey. Those uses their feet. Some even have enlarged feet to help this. Also, not all bats drink blood. In fact, out of over 1,300 species of bat, there are only 3 species or maybe slightly more that drinks blood, called the vampire bats. These are relatively small bats, so they definitely don't lift their prey with their feet. Also, I didn't know any real-world bat that deliberately drops their prey to kill them. This strategy does exist in real world though, usually deployed by eagle, most notably the golden eagle. They usually do this to turtles and tortoises to break their shell. Next, living armor. So, living armor is a big surprise for me. As I've mentioned before, in Dungeon Meshi, living armors are shellfish. More specifically, colony of shellfish. Each part of the colony has its own function, so it can emulate the movement of a demi-human. When the helmet is removed, they cannot see, because the ones specialized for visual detections are located in the helmet. In real world, we don't really have a colony forming shellfish. Well, at least not this kind of colony. This kind of colony reminds me of some hydrozoan, like the manowar, blue button, Velella, etc. In these creatures, some individual forms the sail, some form the stinging tentacle, some form the feeding polyps, etc. Each specialized for different purposes, with different structure. So, the idea of Dungeon Meshi's living armor is definitely not outrageous. The question is, again, why though? Why do they need to mimic demi-human armor? If it's for camouflage, why not just mimic a boulder or something like that? They don't actively attack people, and no hint about them eating people, so it's also not a type of aggressive mimicry. By the way, when they cook the living armor, the nutritional value is just question mark. That makes sense because living armor being an edible mollusk is a new discovery in Dungeon Meshi. Good for Laios, I guess. I hope he'll be able to publish that. Next, treasure bugs. So, treasure bugs are not single species. It's just an umbrella term for arthropod that mimic treasure. A lot of those are insects. There is also centipede, and whatever this thing is. In this case, they deliberately mimic treasures so human will carry them. I'm gonna talk about this in tandem with the next one, which is mimic. So, mimic in Dungeon Meshi is just a hermit crab, like literally. They don't always live inside treasure chests. They move from shell to shell as they grow, then finally using treasure chests when they reach adult size. And so, this last shell act both as protection and as a bait for humans, aka aggressive mimicry. This behavior is the same as real-world hermit crab. So, for those of you who didn't know, hermit crab did not make their own shells. They use marine snail shells and they change shells as they grow. But they don't do this as an aggressive mimicry though. They do this for protection. Okay, back to the treasure bugs. They target adult mimics, which are inside treasure chests, lay their egg there, then the larvae will eat the mimic. That's why, when they reach adulthood, all of them are inside treasure chests. Then humans will open the treasure chests, found them, and carry them. After some time, they will bite the humans that carried them with a paralyzing bite, and they disperse. Very effective and neat strategy if I do say so myself. But, I got one question though. How do the larvae manage to eat the mimic? Because the mimic itself is not bound to the treasure chest. Why don't the mimic just, leave the chest, search for another chest? Some real-world insects directly inject their eggs into other insects, like the parasitoid wasp. But the treasure bug in Dungeon Meshi was shown laying egg into the chest through the gap, not into the mimic itself. One possible answer is, the larvae are microscopic, like some parasitic worms that crawl and enter your body and become endoparasites. Next, Kelpie. It is stated that Kelpie most likely avoid eating liver because liver is dangerous. That is correct, but questionable. In real world, a lot of predators actually eat internal organs first, including livers. The reason is stated by Senshi in this panel. This whole section implies the kelpies eat everything else, which means they also eat intestines. That is technically more dangerous than eating liver. Do keep in mind, they don't prepare the organs. No cooking and stuff. Imagine eating raw intestines straight from the animal. Think about what is contained inside intestines. See what I mean? It's definitely not safer than eating raw liver, so I don't think Laios' explanation is rational. Next, mermaid. They sing to attract humans and drag them into the water to kill them. So, in real world, an animal that uses sounds to attract prey do exist. Do you know what it is? It's human. Did you expect that answer? Hunters mimics many animals' calls, even antlers rattling. In fact, we made a lot of tools so anyone can basically do this. So the idea is definitely not outrageous. Next, merman. While mermaids are mammalian, mermen are just fish. When they are young, they look like typical fish. As they grow old, they grow a hand-like structures. These hands are their pectoral fin. So, we do have a similar thing happening in real world, but not to this extent though. Hand fishes have ventral and pectoral fins that acts like a hand. They use these hand-like fins to crawl on the seafloor. By the way, the hand fishes are ray-finned fish. So is the merman from Dungeon Meshi. Well, at least their design looks so. The fishes that eventually evolved into tetrapods are lobe-finned fish. So it's not hands, it's just fins. Next, bladefish. So there are fishes with sharp and dangerous fins, but definitely not blade-like. The design is probably inspired by the flying fishes, but those fish definitely don't have sharp fins. Next, kraken. Whenever I see a cephalopod, I just instinctively count their arms. When I was reading the manga, it's very difficult to count. So kraken is one of the creatures that I was waiting to appear in the anime. Laios said it is a mix of octopus and squid, so I was wondering how many arms does it has, and how many tentacles, if any. By the way, I have an entire video on this, go check it out if you want to. Anyway, in the Adventurer's Bible, the author said krakens have at least 20 legs. And I was like, what do you mean 20? Where do they even put them? It's definitely not apparent in the manga. When the episode aired, I did some pauses just to count the arms and spot the tentacle. And there you go. You can see the 2 tentacles clearly, and it's definitely more than 8 arms. And then, this scene here is kinda neat, which is a lot clearer than the manga. Oh, by the way, this kraken is very squiddy form-wise. So, many cephalopods can change color deliberately, usually to communicate, some to camouflage. These are controlled by muscles, which are controlled by nerves, which is why, when they die, they usually lose color, just like this kraken. Another thing, this kraken has a vertical pupil. Squids usually have roundish pupil. Meanwhile, octopi usually have horizontal pupil. Cuttlefishes have W pupil. Nautilus have pinhole pupil. As far as I know, there are no cephalopods with vertical pupil. I cannot think of any aquatic animals with vertical pupil aside from crocodilians. Animals with vertical pupils are usually ambush predators. It might be useful for the kraken because they sometimes ambush adventurers or something like that. Lastly, Senshi said the way to kill a cephalopod is to target between the eye. If that's not obvious, that's where their brain is located. Now, while we're talking about this, have you ever heard someone say octopus have 9 brains or something like that? 1 in the head and 1 in each arm? That's not entirely correct, by the way. The one in the base of each arm is not technically brain. Those are ganglia, way simpler than brain. The one in their head is a brain though. Just a side trivia for you. Next, parasite. So, this parasite looks like the typical endoparasitic nematode. Laios ate one of these raw and got a parasite from it. This reminds me of anisakiasis, which is caused by endoparasitic nematode called anisakis. Their life cycle doesn't involve humans, but humans can accidentally ingest them when eating raw fishes or cephalopods infested with anisakis larvae. They aren't adapted to live inside human. Soon enough, they will die inside, so you can indeed wait it out like what they did in the series. While those larvae are still alive, you will feel discomfort though, but normally not to the extent that Laios experienced in the series. Next, tentacles. So, tentacles are just sea anemone but terrestrial. They also sting with nematocysts. So, how it works is like this. Sea anemone and other cnidarians have shells called cnidocyte in their tentacles. When this cnidocyte is triggered, they will eject a capsule called cnidocyst. There are several types of cnidocysts. The one that pierces the target is called nematocyst. I believe nematocyst is the most common type of nidocyst. Anyway, after the nematocyst pierces the target, it will eject the venom inside it. Alright, so, in Dungeon Meshi, the treatment for tentacle sting is vinegar. Laios said so, but also warned that it is species dependent. In some species, vinegar will worsen the effect. This is definitely correct. Do not pour fresh water on Nidarian stings. And definitely don't piss on it. These acts could trigger other nidocytes to fire and can spread the nematocyst even more. Hot water helps your body, but basically doesn't do anything to the cause. If you want to wash the affected area, use seawater. Vinegar is effective in some species only, so you need to be able to identify what stung you. In other species, this will worsen the effect. Some resulted in fatality, so do take it seriously. I tried googling treatment for Nidarian stings, and I can see that some sites still provide outdated information. A lot of sites recommended vinegar for box jellyfish. So, vinegar can indeed stop nidocytes from activating, but it increases the venom load. So, it works if you are somehow wrapped by tentacles but have not activated any nidocytes yet. I've heard you can use something like hydrocortisone cream for the treatment. You can also seek medical care and be administered antihistamines and stuff like that. If you are in pain and aren't sure of what to do, just do that. Don't pour vinegar. Next, giant frogs. So, the interesting part of these frogs is the fact that they are immune to tentacles. It's because of their mucus. So, this has a real-world equivalent in the clownfish. Clownfish lives among sea anemone. Both creatures form some kind of partnership, forming a mutualistic symbiosis. Basically, they protect each other. This partnership is individual specific. As a clownfish spent time living among a sea anemone, it started changing mucus composition. When that anemone senses this specific mucus, it will not eject its nematocyst at all. If another clownfish touches it, it will still trigger the nidocytes. It feels like the giant frogs and tentacle symbiosis in Dungeon Meshi is straight up taken from this, including the mutualistic symbiosis. Tentacle cannot move, so it's relatively easy to be taken care of by the adventurer. Which is why, the giant frogs can take care of the adventurer while clinging onto the tentacle so the adventurers won't be able to reach them. By the way, this coloration looks like an aposematic coloration, but they aren't poisonous in Dungeon Meshi. Next is technically warped, but I don't have anything to say about them. We move on to Red Dragon instead. Red Dragon is said to be in a resting state most of the time. They wake up about once a month to hunt, and then back to its slumber. This is the typical reptile behavior, especially snakes and crocodile. They are poikilothermic with relatively low metabolism rate, so they don't burn a lot of energy constantly. They usually just hunt one big prey every once in a while. Red Dragon also has the classic dragon inverted scale under the chin. In Dungeon Meshi, it is used to indicate their weak point, because it's the closest point to their esophagus and windpipe. Okay, so, the thing that I want to highlight about the Red Dragon is, Laios saying there are a lot of dragon researchers, so he is not that eager to explore them. I could actually relate to this remark. Dragons is my favorite creature, but it's so popular and a lot of people constantly talk about them that I don't really want to spend time thinking about it. In real-world context too, animal researchers are definitely not balanced. Apes and apex predators usually have a lot more research than others. There are several researchers that fill the niche of different groups of animals. You'll see people focusing on whales, some focus on butterflies, dragonflies, beetles, chameleons, etc. And of course, individuals will pass away. At certain periods, there is no research on certain animals, because simply no one is interested or everyone already have another focus. That's also the reason why I focus on deer research, because currently, there are only few academics that do so. Anyway, let's move on. Sea serpent. So, sea serpent is supposed to be a giant sea snake with potent venomous bite that can even render a whale unconscious. Sea snakes do exist. Most of them can be found in Asia and Australia. but some can also be found on East African coast. All sea snakes are elapid. Another famous members of this family would be cobras. Almost all sea snakes are highly venomous, even more venomous than their terrestrial relatives. Good news is, they don't bite that often, and even if they do, most are dry bites. Their venom is mostly neurotoxin, so it's similar to the dungeon Meshi sea serpent. Still, sea snakes don't have fins though. Their body is laterally compressed, especially towards the tail, which looks like an oar. Next is the cockatrice, which is basically the same as basilisk, but their bites can petrify prey. Of course, we don't have a real-life equivalent to petrifying bites, but the origin of petrification from basilisk and cockatrice myths most likely came from elapid bites, which are highly potent neurotoxin. Next, harpy. Okay, pause. If you've already read the manga or watched the anime, you'll notice that I skip a certain major creatures here. I'll talk about that towards the end of this section. Anyway, in Dungeon Meshi, harpy is fully a bird, not a demi-human, but the author still uses the classic depiction of harpy. So I was thinking, how do they even rationalize this part? And it is stated in the miscellaneous monster tales that they use this to hold their eggs and chicks. When I read that, it felt like a light bulb just lights up in my mind, and I was like, it's a brood patch. So, for those of you who didn't know, in most birds, their ventral feathers will come off when they start incubating eggs, or sometimes they even deliberately pluck it off. This bald spot is called brood patch. Feathers are thermal insulator, which is why they incubate with this patch so they can transfer heat properly. A really neat way to explain the classic harpy design. Next is shapeshifter, but I don't really have anything to say about it. It seems to be inspired by the tanuki and kitsune legend from Japan, but no natural explanation for this. Really good episode though. Same with the next creature, which is nightmares, also known as Shen. Shen is based on the Chinese mythology, which is a dragon that can create mirage. Shen as a word also means clam, which is why sometimes they are depicted as a clam. There are a lot of wordplays going on for this creature. Anyway, that's also why the Dungeon Meshi Shen is a dragon with the form of a clam. Next is direwolf. Direwolf existed in real world. They went extinct in the early Holocene. Next, unicorn. What's interesting is, I believe every single unicorn that appears in the series have its horns sawn off. At least that's how it looks like. So I was wondering, is unicorn horn an actual horn or is it like rhinoceros horn? If it's an actual horn, then that horn wouldn't be able to recover. If it's like rhinoceros horn, then it will regrow. In fact, we sometimes saw off rhinoceros horn so poachers don't hunt them. As long as it is sawn above the growth plate, it will regrow. It's like a nail basically. Next, minotaur. So, they have 4 teeth, but most of them are depicted with thoracic teeth, like humans and bears, which looks kinda funny. Cattle's teeth are supposed to be inguinal teeth, so they are located towards the rear. Some minotaurs in Dungeon Meshi do have inguinal teeth though, which is kinda confusing, but yeah. Oh, and cows don't just produce milk out of nowhere, you know. They have to give birth first in order to do so. I'm curious whether they also do artificial insemination for these minotaurs, or do they just let them breed. Anyway, next, griffin. In Dungeon Meshi, griffin fly off and impale their prey. These hunting tactics are done by the shrikes in real world. Shrikes catch a small prey and impale them on thorns, branches, or even barbed wires on a fence. Sometimes they left the impaled food and come back later to eat. So yeah, Dungeon Meshi's griffin behavior is rational. Next, hippogriff. So, the thing I wanted to highlight on this is, when they were cooking griffin meat, this is the nutrition value. When they quite literally changed the griffin meat into hippogriff meat, the fat content plummeted while the iron skyrocketed. This is because horse meat is low fat but high in iron. This is what I mean when I said I stared at the nutrition value and the ingredients. It's kinda fun thinking about how each ingredient contributes to the meal nutrition in the series, which is why it's quite unfortunate that it's not adapted in the anime. Anyway, that is the last animal scene in the Season 1 anime. I still have several creatures to talk about though. First, Dungeon Cleaner. Dungeon cleaners act as the decomposer of the dungeon ecosystem. It also explains how dungeons quote-unquote reset after a while, which is kinda neat. Next, Familiar. So, one of the things that I was waiting for in the anime is Marcial's Familiar. I just want to see how they move, because we can't really see it in the manga. Apparently, it's goofier than I thought. All I'm gonna say is, the skyfish looks like something that belongs in the Paleozoic Sea. Alright, next. I want to talk about specific topic on the humans and demi-humans of this world. But I'm gonna warn you, this information is not something that is provided in the Season 1 anime. It's provided in the Adventurer's Bible. So, if you don't want to hear it, you can skip to this timestamp on the screen. Alright, so, in this world, there are many human races, namely tall man, half-foot, oni or ogre, dwarf, gnome, and elf. Half-blood humans exist. By that I mean, tall man can breed with elf, gnomes, dwarfs, etc. And so does basically all the race. The thing is, some hybrids are sterile. Tall man can breed with half-foot or oni and produce fertile children. Dwarfs can breed with gnomes and produce fertile children. That's the only stated viable hybrid. Other than that combination, the child will be sterile. This made me think, how is the human phylogeny in Dungeon Meshi? Are these races different species? I mean, it makes sense if they are different species. They look very different after all. By the way, did you know we can breed with Neanderthals and Denisovan? In fact, most modern humans have some Neanderthals gene. Neanderthals are often considered a different species, yet they can breed successfully with us, most likely with fertile offsprings. So, how about the human races in Dungeon Meshi? In zoology, there are various degrees of hybrid success. Some animal hybrids are fertile for one sex only. For example, female ligers are fertile, meanwhile males aren't. In butterfly hybrids, males are fertile, meanwhile females aren't. There is a thing called Haldane's rule for this. Of course, some hybrids are just straight up sterile for every sexes. So I'm curious to what degree is this hybrid fertility in Dungeon Meshi. Anyway, next I want to highlight the fact that Kuro, which is a kobold demi-human, survives the sea serpent's bite. It is stated that kobold is immune to venom. This makes me think, why? Usually, animals that become resistant to snake venom are either the predator of snakes or the preferred prey of snakes. It's like an evolutionary arm race between them. That's the extent of my thought though. I'm gonna talk about the major creature that I skipped. Those who already read or watched the anime will know what I mean. For those who haven't, I'm gonna give you a warning right here. This is a major spoiler to the story. If you don't want to be spoiled, I strongly suggest skipping straight to the next section. Check the description, click the timestamp for the next section, and you're good to go. I'm gonna start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, so for the last topic of this section, I want to talk about Polygon, also known as Chimera Phalin. When it first appeared, what piqued my interest is its feather. Later on, it is confirmed that the feather kept it warm. So perhaps it needs feather because dragon itself is a poikilothermic and ectothermic creature, yet the human Phalin part is homeothermic and endothermic. Basically, that part wouldn't survive without some source of heat, hence the feathers, so that its heat does not dissipate quickly and to protect against cold weather. Next, when Laios tried to analyze the anatomy, it made me think, this creature wouldn't last long at all. Because the dragon is large, while the Phalin is really small. The problem is, the head is Phalin. There will be a great disparity between the two parts, especially the digestive systems. Imagine you have to eat a steak, but your head is just the size of your thumb. Then imagine how small your mouth is, how long it takes for you to eat that steak with such a small mouth. The esophagus is also way narrower than the rest of the digestive system. That's only talking about the volume. Phalin's mouth have a different structures compared to the dragon's mouth. So it will be a sudden change, and the mechanical barrier is really high. And what I completely did not expect is, this whole topic is actually brought up in later chapters. I think it's about chapter 62 or something like that. This is the point when I got excited and verbally said, "Oh my god, Ryokokui, I kneel!" In several chapters, Laios made many remarks trying to analyze the biology of Valigon, and it's just fun to see. The miscellaneous monster tale in volume 10 actually made me laugh. And that's the creature in anime season 1. There will be some interesting creatures in the rest of the series. I'll talk about that in the future after the anime completely adapt the series. Okay, before I wrap this video up, I would like to talk about one last thing. I usually pervert character-driven story. I mean, if you listen to the earlier section, it's kinda obvious because my pervert genre is psychological. So, my favorite characters usually fall into 4 specific traits. Well, technically 5, but the 5th is not really applicable in Dungeon Meshi. Some of those 4 traits are quite straightforward, some are very specific. Of course, the characters did not just fall into one of these 4 traits exclusively. The more of these traits they have, the more I like them. There had only been one character that does not check any of these 5 traits but still become my favorite character. So, looking at this list of characters, it would be intuitive to say my favorite character in Dungeon Meshi would be Mizrun. Anime only would probably guess Kabru, and that's fair. Kabru also checks some of these 4 traits, but Mizrun simply checks more traits. In fact, my friends also thought my favorite character would be Mizrun. I mean, I myself would also agree, but in reality, my favorite character is actually Laios, which makes him the second character ever to be one of my favorite characters without even checking any of the usual traits. So, the reason why I really like Laios is because he is very interested in monsters. In fact, if he is basically the same character, but changed his interest from monster to anything else, like swords or whatever, Laios would not even appear in my mind when I think about characters that I like. Looking at Laios makes me want to support him. I want to supervise him in whatever research he wants to do. It might not be a relatable feeling for most people, but those that works in academia will probably understand how it feels. That moment when you meet a potential student feels really nice. What I really like about how Laios is portrayed is that he is really interested in monsters, but still in a healthy way. Perhaps to be precise, he has a good self-control. For example, when Senshi wanted to ride the Kelpie, Laios said he shouldn't do that. Monsters can be dangerous. Think about it. That sentence came out of the individual who is always excited to see monsters. He really likes monsters, yet he will kill monsters if he needs to, because if he did not, others will die. Even when facing the major spoiler monster, he apologized for hesitating, because his act can be a detriment to other people. Laios is not a simpleton. He is not dumb. In fact, he is very rational. Even his thought in the first chapter that I thought was just a comedic tool of the author is a completely rational thought. In later chapters, there will be a sequence of events that leads his view to a certain direction. Yet he is basically still the same Laios. At some point, he shows his childlike sense of wonder, but when others are at stake, he suppresses that side of him. That's what I really like about Laios. From time to time, I see people claiming they love animals, yet they hate humans. Sometimes, their interest towards animals started to grow because they hate humans. Those occurrences are really unfortunate for me. Just think about it. It's not natural at all to hate your own species. Those that claim they love animals while hating humans will eventually hate animals too. All it takes is one bad day. Because, at the end of the day, humans are also animals. Just individuals that live in this world. Each can affect others. So does animals. Those that actually care about animal welfare should not put animals above humans. Because, like I said, humans are animal. You should strive towards a world of balance. If you care about animals, do not alienate yourself from humans. Do not be hostile towards humans. That will just set back the effort of conservationists. The whole point of conservation is to preserve the nature. For that to happen, a balance is needed. An understanding is needed. And for that to happen, a good communication is needed. That's why conservationists don't just work with the animals. They also work with the humans. They educate humans, so other humans will also care about animals. So other humans know what to do to keep the nature in balance. Do not go against humans, go alongside humans. If you really care about animals, be like Laios. He is a good role model. Well, don't mimic him completely though. Seriously, hone your social skills too. It helps a lot. And that's about it. This video ended up way longer than I thought it would. If you are still here, then hey, thanks for watching. This is not my usual kind of video, but I will make another zoologist reviews video from time to time. I usually make weekly videos on various zoology topics, so check out my channel if you have the time, and if you are interested in this kind of content, you could consider subscribing. That's all folks. Enjoy your day.